A reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, and then chapter 31, verses 16 through 17. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. From chapter 31. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath day, celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting covenant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day God rested and was refreshed. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. If we were in a setting more conducive for conversation, such as not being on a YouTube video, I would ask you to tell me how you observed the Sabbath during quarantine. I know many people are coming to church through Zoom conferences or through watching YouTube videos or Facebook Live, and I hope they're making time and room to hold their households and their families and friends and partners in prayer, in their hearts, holding them closely to their souls. And maybe you're participating in some form of creation, like bread making, which seems to be so popular among my friends and people my age. Or for me, a friend sent me a cheese making kit, and so hopefully I'll be able to make my first batch of cheese soon. Maybe it's things that were, pretty common to what you're doing before the quarantine. Or maybe you found something new. But I tell you that it's important to observe the Sabbath, especially during quarantine. When I tell you that it's important to observe the Sabbath during quarantine, I imagine that it can be heard in a couple of different ways. For those who don't have much to do during this time, especially folks who like to have projects and like to go to work and like to do things and produce, go out and socialize, and are maybe finding themselves especially bored, telling them to take a Sabbath during quarantine might sound like, go get a rest from all of your rest. And for those who are especially anxious, whose workloads have increased, or who are afraid of contracting the virus, or afraid of their loved ones contracting the virus, or have lost their jobs, or any number of reasons why you might be anxious right now. It might sound like I'm saying to them to rest while the world is falling apart. And they might ask, how do you expect me to rest? There's no time for that. I'm empathetic to both those responses. It's extremely hard to unlearn the desire to be productive. I think it's good to create and to produce. And in fact, that Exodus says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, gives the work inherent dignity. And God puts in us a spark of creation and productivity that I believe we feel a desire to act out. But I also feel that we've been formed into a kind of hyper-productivity. We've been conditioned into thinking that inactivity is some kind of failure. And this makes it very hard to be still and quiet and just be. There's a constant pull to be doing something, especially something tangible, especially something with results. There's a requirement placed on us at all levels of life, but especially in our jobs, to produce. And the way the work week and even the work day is designed is usually to squeeze the most productive hours from a person. And this being said, it can be very easy to see a successful life or the legacy of a life of a human being as being what he or she produced during that lifetime. Most jobs see employees as little more than units of production, and often we internalize that viewpoint. And we idolize people who have been great producers. Again, I think working is great, and it instills a sense of purpose and dignity, and often betters the world around us. But I also think we get caught up in thinking that our work is us. The common answer to what do you do is to respond with what your job is. And we start to internalize and make work the essence of our being. To the point where if you're not working, then you're not being. And so for those who don't have a lot to do right now, you feel like you're resting and not being productive. But the rest you're getting during this quarantine, I doubt it's actually that restful. Disruptions to our schedules, increased use of screens, the time we spend worrying, the less social interaction we have, being in the same place for long periods of time with the same people, these kinds of things take a mental toll, which is really hard to realize. They make us tired even though we haven't done anything, even though we've been inactive. They put us in a mental fog. They make us feel physically exhausted, even though we've just been lazing around on the couch all day, not doing anything. But boredom itself is also exhaustive to feel like eternity has gone by and it's been 10 minutes. That is exhausting. And so your rest might not be that restful. And as for the second response, the one that feels that there's not enough time to relax, to rest, that feels that their limited mental energy should be used on worrying to survive, worrying on how to make it through, I also empathize with that. When I read some of the statistics about the virus or conflicting stories about it, news reports, and just how inundated we are, the amount of uncertainty that exists in the world, it just feels very defeating. And this just starts to take up all the nooks and crannies of your mind, and it kind of precludes the thought of doing much else besides surviving. It kind of takes away your ability to rest. But whether you think the Sabbath is a rest from your rest, or you feel there is no time or room to take a Sabbath to rest during this pandemic, I still say you need to take a Sabbath during this pandemic. And that's because the Sabbath is not just about rest or not doing anything. The Sabbath is about renewal and connecting with the divine. The Sabbath is to be made holy, not just restful. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote extensively on the Sabbath. He describes it as a sanctuary of time. And that's especially important because so much of human life constitutes sacrificing time for some other kind of gain. Working 8 hours a day to make money to pay your rent. sacrificing your time to study, to gain knowledge, but also to pass the test tomorrow morning. Flitting away hours in the middle of the night for romance. Spending a couple hours to make a meal which is just delicious. We so often trade in commodities of time. He says, to enhance our power in the world of space is our main objective. Yet to have more does not mean to be more. Time is the heart of existence. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in one accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. Our desire to be productive mirrors an orientation towards the realm of space. Being oriented towards the realm of space, towards earthly things, to having an apartment, owning land, to buying groceries. These are important, but being oriented towards that realm of space all of the time, oriented towards having and doing all of the time, means we are not oriented towards being, towards sitting with ourselves. So often our orientation towards the realm of space and productivity, that just turns into working ourselves into exhaustion, in resting only so that we can work again. To be so caught up in survival, we don't live. But the Sabbath is a special kind of rest. It's not a rest only so we can work again. Heschel refutes that. He says, to the biblical mind, however, labor is the means toward an end. And the Sabbath, as a day of rest, as a day of abstaining from toil, is not for the purpose of recovering one's lost strength and becoming fit for the forthcoming labor. The Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. The Sabbath is not just a day for rest to work again, but the Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. It's a day away from the monotony of working, a day away from the monotony of anxiety, a day away from the monotony of just trying to live. It's a day for the spirit to tune in with the body and with the divine. Heschel writes so beautifully, 6 days a week the spirit is alone, disregarded, forsaken, and forgotten. Working under strain, beset with worries, enmeshed in anxieties. Man has no mind for ethereal beauty. But the Spirit is waiting for man to join in. We work. Work at jobs, work at housemaking, work at our relationships, work at existing, work at living during the week. And sometimes the monotony of that, the monotony of a job, or even the monotony of being steeped in anxiety, it starts to dull our spirits and cause them to be alone. It makes us unable to focus on connecting with the divine. But when work is halted and we enter into the sanctuary of time that is the Sabbath, Heschel says the world becomes a place of rest. An hour arrives like a guide and raises our mind above accustomed thoughts. People assemble to welcome the wonder of the seventh day, while the Sabbath sends out its presence over the fields, into our homes, into our hearts. It is a moment of resurrection of the dormant spirit in our souls, refreshed and renewed. There is not enough grandeur in our souls to be able to unravel in words the knot of time and destiny. This is the intention of the Sabbath. Not a rest from our rest, or a rest so that we can work more, or a distraction from the anxiety of the time. The Sabbath is a resurrection of the dormant spirit in our souls, a time for renewal, a reconnection with the divine. And I know it's not the reality that everybody is bored right now, and I know it's the reality that not everybody has a whole day to stop working and toiling and to come into the clean stillness of the Sabbath. But as Jesus says, the Sabbath is made for man and not man for the Sabbath. That time of rest, no matter how small it is still accessible to all of us. It may take different forms and different meanings for us. And at a time when it seems we have a lot less space, and for some of us a lot more time, there's no better time to examine our relationship with time, to think about how we will build a sanctuary in time to renew and resurrect our dormant spirits. And this is the lasting covenant given to the Israelites, which we haven't inherited, for us Christians has been interpreted by Jesus, that we may have the clean stillness of rest of the Sabbath, even if it's just a small grain. That through monotony, through working, through anxiety and anguish, through living and existing, we can build a sanctuary in time to refresh and resurrect our dormant souls. That we shall rest not for the sake of working again, but we shall rest so that our spirits can come back into tune with this divine covenant we have. We build a sanctuary in time so that we can be reminded that God works in cosmic infinity in terms of eternity. And in the Sabbath that collapses into a day, into a moment, into a time of resurrection and renewal. Heschel says, all week long we are called upon to sanctify life through the employs of things of space. On the Sabbath, it is given us to share in the holiness that is in the heart of time. Even when our soul is seared, even when no prayer can come out of our tightened throats, the clean, silent rest of the Sabbath leads us into the realm of endless peace, or to the beginning of an awareness of what eternity means. It is important for you to take a Sabbath. It is always important, but now especially, it is important. In so many ways, our mastery over the realm of space has been questioned or compromised. For many of us, the realm of space has collapsed into just our houses, or even just our rooms, or even less than that. Now especially, we must put our hearts in tune with time, to work to renew and resurrect our souls, to work at understanding truly what eternity means, and that this moment of the quarantine is not eternity. To realize the covenant we have inherited, that there is time for us to rest, that we must build this sanctuary in time to renew our spirit, to live above the monotony of daily life, even just for a moment, to refresh, to renew, and to resurrect our spirit. So I ask you again, what are you doing for the Sabbath? What have you been doing to resurrect your dormant spirit? How do you take just one day, one moment, 1 hour, 1 minute a week to reconnect with the divine, to celebrate life, and to lead yourself towards the clean, silent rest of the Sabbath, which leads to understanding endless peace and an awareness of what eternity means? Not a rest from your rest, not a distraction from your anxiety. How are you working to resurrect and refresh your soul? Hope you can find, to carve out, to intentionally make with God a sanctuary in time. And you work on that soul renewal, refreshing and resting just like God